Football has a funny way of making us believe that beautiful things will last forever. We watch a team dominate, we watch a tactical system change the world, and we tell ourselves that this is the new normal. But deep down, we know the truth. The truly special moments are short-lived. They are fleeting instances where the universe aligns perfectly for a brief second before reality breaks it all apart. Think about the summer of 2014. If you were watching the game back then, you knew you were witnessing a massive shift in the sport. Barcelona, a club built on the rigid philosophy of tiki-taka and collective machinery, decided to inject pure, unadulterated South American fire into their front line. Luis Suarez arrived from Liverpool, joining Lionel Messi and Neymar Jr. On paper, it looked like a dream. In reality, it became a nightmare for every single defender on the planet. For 3 seasons, these 3 men did not just play football. They dismantled it. They rewrote every scoring metric, brought teams to their knees, and did it all with smiles on their faces. They scored 364 goals together. Let that number sink in for a second. That is not a statistic, it is an absolute anomaly. But as we sit here today, looking at the hyper-commercialized, heavily calculated landscape of modern football, a chilling realization sets in. We are never going to see another trio like MSN. Not because the talent does not exist, and not because clubs do not have money. We will never see it again because the modern football industry has fundamentally changed the human ego, the financial boundaries, and the way superstar players view their own careers. The world that allowed Messi, Suarez, and Neymar to coexist has been permanently erased. Before we dive into the deep, dark financial and psychological reasons behind this shift, I want to welcome you to the Football Archive. If you love deep dives into football history, tactical evolutions, and stories that define the beautiful game, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment below telling me where you are watching this video from, and let me know your absolute favorite MSN goal. Let us get a massive debate going in the comments section, because we are breaking down everything today. To truly understand why another MSN is impossible, you have to look at the sheer selflessness that defined them. It was a beautiful paradox. You had 3 of the top 5 players on the planet sitting in the exact same dressing room. In today's game, that is a ticking time bomb. Modern wingers and strikers are raised to be independent global corporations. They are brands first and teammates second. But back then, something magical happened. Lionel Messi, already a multi-time Ballon d'Or winner, and the undisputed king of Catalonia, willingly shifted his position to the right wing to allow Luis Suarez to occupy the central striker role. Imagine a modern megastar doing that today without throwing a tantrum on social media or having their agent leak complaints to the press. Neymar, the golden boy of Brazilian football, the man destined to inherit the global throne, was perfectly content with playing on the left, acting as the creative spark plug while letting Messi remain the focal point. They loved each other. They assisted each other when they could have scored themselves. They laughed on the pitch like kids playing in a cage tournament in Sao Paulo or Rosario. But that beautiful brotherhood was a product of a specific moment in time. A moment right before the transfer market completely shattered, right before salaries reached outer space, and right before social media completely redefined what it means to be a footballer. We look back at those 3 years with immense nostalgia because we unconsciously know the truth. It was the last stand of pure, unselfish superstar football. What followed next changed the sport forever, creating a world where egos are too massive, money is too tight, and the desire to be the number 1 man makes a trio like MSN an absolute impossibility. If you think a modern club can just throw billions of dollars together and recreate that magic, you are dead wrong. The structural damage to the football economy has already been done, and the blueprint is completely gone. To understand how we got here, we have to look at exactly how Barcelona pulled off this financial miracle in the first place, and why the current economic rules would completely block it from ever happening again. Get ready, because the next chapter reveals the precise financial mechanics that built the monster, and why those same mechanics caused the market to implode. To understand why a trio like MSN can never happen again, you have to look at the exact moment they were brought together. It was a perfect economic window in football history, a Goldilocks zone that has since been completely slammed shut. Back in 2013 and 2014, the transfer market was expensive, yes, but it was still rational. When Barcelona signed Neymar from Santos in 2013, it was a massive, highly complex deal surrounded by political drama, but the market value of a generational talent was still grounded in reality. The following summer, when they went after Luis Suarez, the Uruguayan was coming off an absolute masterclass of a season with Liverpool, nearly dragging them to a Premier League title. But because of the infamous biting incident at the 2014 World Cup and the subsequent FIFA ban, Barcelona managed to secure arguably the best pure number 9 in the world for a fee around 81 million euros. Combined with Lionel Messi, who had risen through the ranks of La Masia for absolutely zero transfer cost, Barcelona built the most lethal attacking trident in human history for a combined transfer expenditure that looks like an absolute bargain by modern standards. If you try to assemble that exact same tier of talent today, the financial math completely collapses. Think about the market today. Average wingers with one good season in Western Europe are being quoted at 100 million euros. If a 21-year-old Brazilian showing Neymar-level potential emerged right now, his release clause would instantly be set at 1 billion euros, and English clubs would be bidding 200 million before he even stepped foot in Europe. The baseline cost of entry for elite talent has experienced hyperinflation, but the transfer fees are only half the battle. The real reason this financial construction is impossible today is the structural reality of player wages. When MSN was playing together, Barcelona was pushing their wage bill to the absolute limit, spending nearly 70% of their total club revenue on player salaries. They were flying incredibly close to the sun, but because global TV rights, sponsorship deals, and digital revenue were expanding at an exponential rate, they could just barely sustain it. Today, the economic landscape of top-tier football is trapped in a regulatory vice grip. European governing bodies and domestic leagues have completely tightened the screws on financial sustainability. The days of a club president simply writing a massive check to cover a wage bill that exceeds their revenue are long gone. If a modern club tried to pay 3 players the equivalent market salaries of peak Messi, peak Neymar, and peak Suarez simultaneously, they would find themselves instantly hit with massive point deductions, transfer bans, and complete disqualification from elite competitions. The sheer mathematical reality is that you cannot fit 3 global Tier 1 salaries into a single squad anymore without completely gutting the remaining 8 positions on the pitch. Barcelona managed to do it because they had a golden generation of midfielders like Andres Iniesta, Xavi Hernandez, and Sergio Busquets who were deeply loyal to the club and hadn't yet reached the hyperinflated salary demands of modern mercenary contracts. It was a freak occurrence of timing. They caught Messi at his absolute peak, bought Neymar right before his value went into outer space, and capitalized on a market discount for Luis Suarez. They built a billion-dollar front line for a fraction of the cost. But this aggressive financial gamble created a massive ripple effect throughout the entire sport. By gathering that much firepower in one place, Barcelona did not just build a great team. They accidentally broke the global transfer economy. They set a standard of excess that forced the rest of Europe to react, triggering a financial arms race that would eventually lead to the destruction of the trio itself. The money became too big, the stakes became too high, and the world of football realized that allowing one club to hold all the cards was bad for business. As we move into the next chapter, we look at how this financial pressure cooker began to warp the minds of the players themselves, introducing a toxic element that no amount of Barcelona money could fix, the desperate, commercial necessity to be the undisputed number 1 man. To truly understand why we will never see another MSN, we have to look past the spreadsheets and look directly at the human psyche. Specifically, the modern obsession with individual legacy. In football today, a player is no longer just an athlete who plays for a badge. A superstar player is an independent multinational corporation. They have their own lifestyle brands, their own media teams, their own multi-million-dollar footwear contracts, and a massive entourage whose entire financial survival depends on that single player being the absolute center of the football universe. This brings us to the ultimate paradox of the number 1 man. To win a Ballon d'Or, to dominate the front pages of global sports media, and to secure the most lucrative commercial endorsements, a player must be the undisputed focal point of a project. They cannot be a co-star. They cannot share the marquee. And this is exactly where the modern mentality completely diverges from the spirit of MSN. When you look back at Messi, Suarez, and Neymar, their coexistence was an absolute psychological miracle. You had 3 players who were completely capable of being the main man at any football club on the face of the earth. Before coming to Spain, Neymar was treated like a literal god in Brazil, carrying the pressure of an entire nation on his young shoulders. Luis Suarez had just completed one of the most individually dominant seasons in Premier League history, terrifying English defenders single-handedly. Yet, when they arrived in Catalonia, they consciously chose to suppress their own egos for the collective good. They accepted a hierarchy that positioned Lionel Messi as the natural king, but Messi himself was unselfish enough to share the crown. This level of psychological maturity is completely extinct in today's generation of young talent. Today, if a young player scores 20 goals in a season, his representatives instantly start demanding the keys to the kingdom. They want him taking every penalty, they want the entire tactical system built around his specific strengths, and they want him to be the face of every marketing campaign. The modern ecosystem rewards individualism over collectivism. If a modern trio of that caliber were put together today, the tension would destroy the dressing room within 6 months. Imagine 3 modern superstars arguing over who gets to take a penalty in the Champions League quarterfinals because their individual brand bonuses depend on their goal-scoring statistics. That is the reality of the game in 2026. The commercial pressure from sponsors like Nike, Adidas, and Puma pushes these players to stand alone in the spotlight. A sponsor does not want their premier asset sharing a billboard with 2 other guys who might steal the thunder. They want a lone hero. This relentless drive for individual validation creates a massive psychological barrier to forming a truly great trio. Young players today look at the history books and they do not just want to win trophies, they want to win the narrative. They want the individual accolades that cement their status as the best of their generation. Neymar himself eventually fell victim to this exact psychological trap. Despite the trophies, despite the beautiful football, and despite the genuine love he had for Messi and Suarez, the whispers in his ear became too loud. The media kept telling him that as long as he shared a pitch with Lionel Messi, he would always be standing in a shadow. He would never be the true number one. This psychological friction is the exact reason why modern super teams fail before they even start. You can buy the best talent in the world, but you cannot buy the willingness to be second best for the sake of a teammate. The modern football machine produces hyper-focused, individualistic competitors who are taught to maximize their personal brand at all costs. And as we will see in the next chapter, when this toxic mix of commercial ambition and individual ego finally boiled over in the summer of 2017, it did not just break up MSN, it triggered a cataclysmic explosion that permanently altered the landscape of global football transfers forever. August 2017 will forever be remembered as the moment the old world of football died. It was the summer the transfer market went from an expensive sandbox to an astronomical casino, and it all centered around one man making the most controversial decision in modern sports history. Neymar Jr. decided to pack his bags, leave the paradise of Barcelona, and sign for Paris Saint-Germain. The French club did not just negotiate a deal. They walked up to the offices of La Liga and triggered Neymar's mind-boggling release clause of €222 million in cash. To this day, in the summer of 2026, that single transaction remains the most expensive transfer of all time. It was an earth-shattering event that completely dismantled MSN in a matter of days. But the true damage of that transfer was not just the fact that it separated 3 friends. The true damage was the devastating ripple effect it sent through the entire global economy of football, creating an environment where building another trio like MSN became a financial impossibility. The moment Paris Saint-Germain dropped €222 million on a single player, the valuation of every single professional footballer on the planet instantly doubled. Suddenly, clubs across Europe realized that the old price tags no longer applied. If Neymar was worth that much, then an unproven 20-year-old with potential was suddenly worth $100 million. Barcelona, sitting on a massive mountain of cash, but trapped in absolute panic, rushed into the market to replace the irreplaceable. They desperately tried to recreate the magic of the trio by throwing money at the problem. They spent over €105 million on Ousmane Dembele. They spent another €145 million on Philippe Coutinho. Later, they dropped another €120 million on Antoine Griezmann. They tried to buy their way back to a legendary trio, but they failed spectacularly. Every single one of those signings collapsed under the immense weight of their price tags and the structural instability of the team. Barcelona's frantic attempt to fix what Neymar broke pushed the club into a catastrophic financial spiral, leading to a mountain of debt that would eventually force Lionel Messi himself to leave the club years later. The Neymar transfer proved that you cannot simply buy a trio through brute force and marketing campaigns. The market had become far too volatile. Ever since that fateful summer, clubs have been terrified of losing their star assets, leading to the creation of absurd, symbolic release clauses of €1 billion for young players in Spain. It completely locked the elite talent down. Furthermore, it changed the way selling clubs operate. Before 2017, a club like Liverpool or Borussia Dortmund would sell their best player for a fair, competitive price. Post-2017, those same clubs demand ransom fees that completely deplete the buyer's transfer budget for multiple windows. If a modern club wants to buy a world-class striker today, they have to commit their entire financial strategy to that one signing, leaving absolutely zero resources to buy two more world-class attackers to support him. The Neymar effect created a top-heavy, highly unbalanced ecosystem where wealth is concentrated, but the ability to spread that wealth across three distinct superstars in a single frontline is completely gone. The transfer market became a landscape of desperate, defensive spending, where clubs pay premium prices for average output. By breaking up the most beautiful trio the world had ever seen, Paris Saint-Germain did not just buy a player. They established a new world order where the sheer cost of building a balanced, elite attacking force became completely prohibitive. And as the financial dust settled, a new entity emerged from the rubble of this broken market, the modern footballer as a completely independent, hyper-managed corporate enterprise, which we will explore next. If you could somehow bypass the massive financial restrictions of the modern transfer market and gather three world-class attackers into a single team today, you would immediately run into a much larger, completely invisible wall. The modern footballer is no longer just an athlete who clocks into a training ground, plays 90 minutes, and goes home. In the year 2026, an elite football player is a fully verticalized, hyper-managed corporate enterprise. They are surrounded by an endless army of digital marketing managers, public relations firms, brand strategists, and data analysts whose entire job is to maximize the individual valuation of that single player. This complete shift in how a footballer's career is managed has fundamentally destroyed the fertile ground required to grow a trio like MSN. When Lionel Messi, Luis Suarez, and Neymar were tearing up European defenses, social media was certainly a massive force, but had not yet completely swallowed the sport whole. Players still define their success almost exclusively by what happened within the white lines of the pitch. Today, a player's digital footprint, their follower growth on TikTok, their individual viewership metrics, and their global marketability index are often treated with the exact same level of importance as their actual on-field performance. This creates a deeply toxic environment for collective greatness. To maintain these massive digital empires, a player must be the absolute protagonist of their team's content. Sponsors do not invest tens of millions of dollars into a player to watch them willingly step aside so a teammate can score a tap-in. The commercial partnerships demand that the player is the hero of the narrative, the one taking the crucial penalty, the one featured in the thumbnail of the post-match recap, and the one dominating the algorithmic feed. This constant, relentless drive for individual optimization creates an underlying friction that makes a fluid, unselfish trident completely impossible to maintain. Imagine a modern trio where player A refuses to pass to player B because player B's social media engagement is eclipsing his own, or because a specific performance bonus in a boot deal dictates that he must reach a certain number of individual goals to unlock a multi-million-dollar payout. This is not a hypothetical scenario. This is exactly how modern elite football operates behind closed doors. The purity of the game has been systematically replaced by the metrics of the attention economy. When MSN played, their unselfishness was their greatest weapon. They genuinely celebrated each other's success because their personal brands were still secondary to the collective joy of winning trophies together. Messi would regularly pass up hat tricks to hand the ball to Suarez or Neymar if they were going through a dry spell. In today's hyper-calculated corporate football landscape, an entourage would look at that level of selflessness as an absolute disaster for their client's brand value. They would see it as a waste of statistical capital. The modern player is taught from academy level to view themselves as an isolated asset that must be protected and promoted above all else. This hyper-individualistic training produces phenomenal athletes with flawless physical conditioning, but it completely strips away the raw, intuitive, and deeply empathetic understanding that made MSN a living, breathing work of art. You can program a robot to execute a tactical scheme perfectly, but you cannot program a corporate brand to fall in love with its competitor. And as these independent player corporations grow larger and more powerful than the clubs they play for, they inevitably clash with the strict regulatory frameworks designed to keep the sport's finances from collapsing completely, a financial vice grip that we will break down in our next chapter. We have reached the absolute heart of the matter, the definitive structural barrier that stands between the modern game and the resurrection of a legendary trident. If you ever find yourself debating with your friends about why a modern super team cannot just replicate the MSN formula by throwing endless capital at the problem, this is the exact weapon you need to win the argument. It is called financial fair play, and in the year 2026, it has transformed from a loose set of guidelines into an absolute iron cage that dictates every single move a football club can make. Back in the golden era of Barcelona's dominance, regulations were notoriously flexible. Clubs could run massive deficit operations, secure loans based on projected future earnings that were wildly optimistic, and inflate sponsorship valuations through creative accounting methods without facing severe sporting consequences. That regulatory Wild West allowed Barcelona to sustain a payroll that was mathematically terrifying. But those days are completely dead and buried. If you are enjoying this deep breakdown of how the modern football economy has altered the beautiful game, take a quick second right now to hit that like button. We put immense research into ensuring these insights give you the real story behind the sport. Make sure you are subscribed to the Football Archive so you never miss our deep dives, and drop a comment below letting me know if you think financial fair play is actually saving football, or if it is just protecting the traditional elite. Let us get the chat absolutely buzzing. Now, let us look closely at the modern regulatory trap. UEFA's squad cost rules, alongside strict domestic financial monitoring systems like La Liga's economic controls, have implemented a definitive ceiling. Clubs are now legally restricted to spending a maximum percentage of their defined, verified revenues on player wages, agent fees, and transfer amortization. If you cross that line, the punishments are swift, brutal, and completely non-negotiable. We are talking about massive point deductions that can ruin a season, immediate exclusion from the lucrative Champions League, and severe registration bans that prevent clubs from even fielding their new signings. To put 3 absolute Tier 1 superstars into a single frontline in today's economic climate would completely break the machine. The sheer scale of modern contracts means that each of these players demands a financial package that can easily consume 20 to 30% of a club's entire sustainable revenue. Multiply that by 3, and you have a front line that devours up to 90% of your allowed squad cost budget before you have even purchased a goalkeeper, signed a competent back line, or secured a midfield to actually feed the ball to your star attackers. It is a mathematical impossibility to build a balanced, competitive squad under these rules while harboring 3 mega earners. If a modern club tries to force it, they are instantly forced to fill the remaining 8 positions on the pitch with low-cost academy players or cheap, unproven depth options. This creates a deeply fractured, fragile team structure that collapses under the tactical demands of elite modern football. You end up with a team that is incredibly top-heavy, completely incapable of defensive transitions, and entirely reliant on individual moments of brilliance rather than a collective system. The iron cage of financial regulation has effectively legislated the superstar trio out of existence. It has forced modern sporting directors to build teams with strict cost distribution models, focusing on holistic squad depth rather than a concentrated cluster of historic star power. The economic landscape has forced a tactical shift, moving away from individual star alignment and toward highly optimized, system-based efficiency. And as these financial barriers continue to tighten across Europe, they trigger a profound psychological shift in the minds of the next generation of football talents, a shift that manifests as a deep reluctance to ever play second fiddle to another star, which we will examine next. Beyond the financial regulations and the corporate structures lies a deeper, highly destructive psychological phenomenon that has infected the modern generation of elite attackers. It is what scouts and sporting directors behind the scenes call the second fiddle syndrome. In the contemporary football landscape, young, world-class players possess a deep, almost pathological reluctance to enter a sporting project where they will not be the primary focal point of the team's attack. This is a massive departure from the cultural mindset that allowed Messi, Suarez, and Neymar to achieve absolute synergy. When you look closely at the history of MSN, the mechanics of their partnership worked because each player felt entirely secure in their own sporting identity. Suarez arrived as an established global icon who had already proved he could dominate a league by himself. Neymar arrived with his reputation as the future king of Brazil completely secured. They did not feel diminished by sharing the pitch with Lionel Messi because they understood that the collective glory would elevate all of their legacies simultaneously. Today, that security has been completely replaced by a profound anxiety over spotlight distribution. If an elite 22-year-old winger is approached by a mega club today, the very first question his representation asks is not about the tactical system or the history of the badge. They want to know exactly how many touches, how many shots, and how much creative priority their client will receive compared to the other stars in the squad. They are terrified of being cast as a supporting actor. They look at the historic trajectories of players who willingly took a step back to support a greater star, and instead of seeing glory, they see a warning tale of a compromised brand. Modern young talents are explicitly advised by their entourages to avoid any club where an established superstar already dictates the culture and the tactical flow of the game. This creates a massive fragmentation of talent across the European continent. Instead of the best players clustering together to form legendary partnerships like MSN, the talent is actively pushed apart. Every single elite attacker wants their own kingdom. They want to be the undisputed face of the franchise, the player who gets all the credit when things go well, and the player whose face dominates the matchday graphics. If you place 3 of these hypersensitive modern assets into the same forward line today, the tactical chemistry is completely poisoned by resentment. Every single pass that is not played, every single run that is ignored, and every single penalty that is assigned to a teammate is viewed through the lens of a personal slight or a deliberate attempt to suppress their individual market value. The fluid, joyous, and instinctively telepathic passing sequences that made MSN an absolute joy to watch require a level of deep psychological trust that simply cannot survive in an era dominated by the second fiddle syndrome. Players are no longer willing to run into space just to drag a defender away so their teammate can score the winner. They want the goal for themselves because the goal is the currency of the modern football economy. This complete erosion of structural unselfishness means that even if a club manages to bypass the financial constraints of the era, the resulting front line will always behave like 3 independent mercenaries operating on the same patch of grass, rather than a single, unified, and hyper-destructive attacking organism. And as this individualistic anxiety continues to guide the career paths of the world's best talents, it is constantly reinforced and amplified by the external forces that control these players from the shadows, a network of powerful agents and family-run management firms whose impact we will break down next. To truly understand how the beautiful game lost the ability to foster a partnership like MSN, you have to look into the shadows. You have to look away from the training pitches and into the luxury boardrooms where the real decisions are made. In the year 2026, the traditional football agent has been entirely replaced by a far more complex, deeply protective entity, the hyper-managed family entourage and the predatory mega-agency. These entities do not just negotiate contracts, they engineer narratives. They control every single word their client speaks, every brand they align with, and every strategic career move they make. And their primary objective is absolute individual domination. Back when Messi, Suarez, and Neymar formed their historic bond, their representations were certainly powerful, but they still operated within the traditional boundaries of sports management. They understood that the ultimate value of their client was deeply tied to the trophies won on the pitch and the historic legacy of the collective team. Today, the modern entourage views a football club not as a home to build a legacy, but as a temporary launchpad for a global personal brand. This fundamental shift in perspective has completely poisoned the well for any potential superstar trio. A modern entourage looks at a situation where their client is sharing the spotlight with 2 other world-class attackers, and they do not see an opportunity for historic greatness. They see a direct, critical threat to their revenue streams. They see a situation where their assets' statistical output could be diluted, which directly impacts their leverage in future contract negotiations or multi-million-dollar endorsement renewals. The modern agent is constantly whispering in the player's ear, filling their mind with doubt, comparison, and hyper-ambition. If a player goes 2 games without scoring because they were busy tracking back or creating space for a teammate, the entourage does not praise their tactical discipline. They call emergency meetings with the sporting director, leak stories of unhappiness to the global football press, and start orchestrating a transfer to a club where their client can be the undisputed king. This constant, relentless external pressure makes it completely impossible for players to develop the genuine, deep-seated trust that defined MSN. Messi, Suarez, and Neymar were famously close friends off the pitch, frequently sharing barbecues, traveling together, and supporting each other through personal and professional crises. Their families were integrated, creating an emotional safety net that allowed them to completely leave their professional egos at the door. In today's hyper-competitive ecosystem, the entourages of three competing superstars would actively discourage that level of intimacy. They view the other stars not as brothers in arms, but as direct corporate rivals fighting for the exact same slice of the global attention economy. The modern dressing room is surrounded by a ring of protective, hyper-ambitious agents who look at every tactical decision through a magnifying glass of personal interest. This atmosphere of deep suspicion and manufactured rivalry entirely suffocates the organic, spontaneous joy that is required to build a telepathic frontline. You cannot have a fluid, self-governing trio when three separate teams of lawyers, public relations managers, and family members are actively pulling the strings from the shadows, calculating every single move to ensure their specific asset comes out on top of the club hierarchy. The shadow masters of the modern game have successfully prioritized the individual over the collective, and as we will see in our next chapter, this relentless drive for individual maximization has driven player valuations and club payrolls to a point of complete and total economic collapse. The financial consequences of managing superstar player brands have created an absolute mathematical crisis for modern club directors. To fully grasp why another MSN will never materialize, you have to look at how a club's salary structure affects the remaining 8 players on the pitch. In the modern era, wage inflation has grown at a pace that completely outstrips the commercial growth of even the biggest clubs in the world. When a single player can command a salary of 50 to 60 million euros net per season, the entire ecosystem of the squad is thrown completely out of balance. This is the financial trap that ultimately ensures a trio of MSN's caliber can never exist again in a competitive, modern team. Back in 2015, Barcelona's board was paying immense wages to Messi, Suarez, and Neymar, but the gap between the front line and the rest of the squad was still manageable. The club could still afford to maintain a world-class midfield consisting of Ivan Rakitic, Sergio Busquets, and Andres Iniesta, alongside a stellar defensive line featuring Javier Mascherano, Gerard Pique, and Jordi Alba. The support structure was elite because the baseline salary demands of defensive players hadn't yet been completely warped by the striker market. Today, that balance is a complete fiction. If a modern club attempts to stack 3 Tier 1 attacking salaries onto their wage bill, the financial gravity instantly crushes the rest of the roster. The sheer volume of money required to satisfy 3 independent corporate entities leaves absolutely zero budget to secure elite defensive talent or creative midfielders. You are forced into a disastrous compromise. You end up with a team that possesses an incredibly expensive, glamorous frontline, but a midfield and defense composed of unproven academy products, aging free agents, or low-cost fill-ins who are completely out of their depth at the highest level of European competition. We see this structural failure happening across the continent whenever a club tries to buy short-term success through marketing star power. The modern game is far too fast, far too physical, and far too tactically demanding for a team to survive with an elite frontline and a mediocre supporting cast. Modern defensive systems and high-pressing tactical machines will completely isolate a top-heavy team, cutting off the supply lines to the attackers and exploiting the massive defensive vulnerabilities in the rest of the formation. A front line can only win you games if the midfield can actually win the ball and transition it forward. By concentrating all of their economic resources into 3 individual superstar contracts, a club effectively guarantees the tactical collapse of their own project. The modern football economy dictates that a sustainable, championship-winning squad must distribute its wealth horizontally across the entire starting 11, prioritizing depth, versatility, and tactical cohesion over a concentrated cluster of historic star power. The era where a club could simply pay a premium for a magical frontline and fill the rest of the pitch with loyal, low-cost squad players is officially dead. The financial math simply does not add up anymore, and any club that attempts to defy this economic reality quickly finds out that they are building a house of cards that will fold under the slightest tactical pressure. And as we look closely at the recent history of the sport, we don't even have to guess how this catastrophic experiment plays out in real life, because one club actually tried to force it through pure marketing willpower, resulting in one of the most spectacular failures in modern football history, which we will analyze next. If you ever need an absolute real-world case study that proves why assembling a modern superstar trio is completely doomed to fail, you only have to look at the recent experiment conducted in the capital of France. Paris Saint-Germain, fueled by the limitless sovereign wealth of Qatar, believed they could defy the changing laws of the football economy, ignore the psychological warnings of the ego era, and simply buy their way into history. They reunited Lionel Messi and Neymar Jr., and then paired them with the most explosive young talent on the planet, Kylian Mbappe. On paper, the M&M trio looked like an upgrade on the legendary MSN. The global media went into an absolute frenzy, predicting that this new constellation of stars would completely humiliate European football and cruise to multiple Champions League titles. Instead, what the world witnessed was a spectacular, slow-motion train wreck that permanently exposed the toxic reality of the modern superstar frontline. The fundamental difference between MSN and M&M was not a lack of footballing talent, it was a total absence of human chemistry and unselfish tactical alignment. When Messi, Suarez, and Neymar played together, their movements were fluid, intuitive, and deeply empathetic. They actively hunted for each other on the pitch, sacrificing personal glory for the collective joy of the team. At Paris Saint-Germain, that beautiful synergy was entirely replaced by an atmosphere of cold, corporate isolation. The front line did not operate as a single devastating unit. It operated as three independent, hypersensitive brands forced to share the same workspace. There was no joy, no natural chemistry, and no shared tactical sacrifice. While Messi and Neymar tried to establish their creative passing rhythms, Mbappe wanted to exploit space with his explosive pace, demanding that the entire tactical scheme be tailored to his specific strengths. The dressing room was instantly fractured by massive power struggles, penalty disputes, and media leaks orchestrated by competing family entourages. But the ultimate failure of M&M was not just psychological, it was deeply tactical. Modern elite football is completely dominated by aggressive, high-pressing machines and lightning-fast defensive transitions. To survive at the highest level of the Champions League, every single player on the pitch must be entirely committed to the defensive structure, pressing out of possession and tracking back to support the midfield. The M&M frontline simply refused to do the dirty work. When Paris Saint-Germain lost possession, the three superstars would stand near the halfway line, hands on their hips, watching their teammates get overrun by physical, highly disciplined opponents. The midfield and defense were left completely exposed, forced to cover twice the ground to compensate for a frontline that was too proud and too disconnected to defend. It was a tactical disaster. The team routinely collapsed under pressure against well-organized European sides that valued collective work rate over individual marketability. The M&M project proved once and for all that you cannot build a legendary football team by simply treating superstar assets like collectible trading cards. It showed the entire world that without genuine friendship, mutual unselfishness, and a complete willingness to sacrifice the personal brand for the collective badge, a high-profile trio is nothing more than an expensive marketing illusion. And as the modern football industry takes notes on this historic failure, it must also confront a much deeper, structural crisis occurring at the very roots of the European academy system, a crisis that is systematically destroying the generation of creative, intuitive players required to ever form a trio of that magnitude again. If you look past the financial restrictions, the corporate entourages, and the wreckage of failed super teams, you will find the final, most permanent reason why another MSN is completely impossible. The global football academy system has stopped producing the types of players that made that trio magical in the first place. Over the last decade, youth development in Western Europe and South America has undergone a massive clinical transformation. The raw, unpredictable, street-taught footballer has been systematically replaced by a hyper-disciplined, tactically automated athlete. This rigid industrialization of talent development has effectively killed the artistic intuition required to form a telepathic attacking trident. Think about how Lionel Messi, Luis Suarez, and Neymar grew up. They were products of a completely different era of development. They learned the game on the dirt pitches of Rosario, the concrete streets of Montevideo, and the crowded futsal courts of Sao Paulo. They developed their skills through raw trial and error, learning how to deceive defenders using pure deception, unpredictable body movements, and instinctive spatial awareness. Their football was emotional, creative, and entirely decentralized. When they came together at Barcelona, they brought that raw street intuition with them, allowing them to invent passing sequences on the fly that no manager could ever draw on a whiteboard. Today, the modern youth academy operates like a high-tech manufacturing plant. From the age of 8, young prospects are placed into highly structured, system-based environments. They are taught exactly where to stand, how many touches to take before passing, and how to execute automated tactical patterns designed by data analysts. If a young winger tries to beat 3 defenders using pure street skill, they are instantly scolded by their coach for violating the principles of positional play and risking a turnover. The modern system deliberately suppresses individual risk-taking in favor of high-efficiency retention and low-risk ball circulation. This produces an endless assembly line of phenomenal athletes who possess flawless physical conditioning, perfect passing percentages, and immense tactical discipline. But it also produces players who are completely identical. The modern winger is taught to stay wide, receive the ball, pass it back to the midfielder, and maintain the defensive shape. They are component parts in a massive, robotic collective machine. They lack the audacity, the flair, and the rebellious creative spark that allowed MSN to completely tear up the tactical rulebook. You cannot build a legendary, intuitive trio if the academy system only produces specialized, hyper-focused robots who are terrified of making a mistake. The modern game has sacrificed the beautiful, chaotic art of football for the sterile predictability of physical efficiency and algorithmic safety. This structural shift in player production means that the very raw material required to build another MSN is no longer being mined. The sport has evolved into a chess match played at hyperspeed, where managers demand total control over every single micromovement on the pitch. The beautiful, unscripted, and entirely self-governing poetry that defined the partnership of Messi, Suarez, and Neymar has been systematically bred out of the elite level of the sport, leaving us with a highly professionalized entertainment product that is brilliant to look at, but completely devoid of that rare, fleeting magic. And as we look toward the horizon of this highly automated future, we must come to terms with what we have lost, summarizing the epic legacy of the Trinity and leaving a definitive message for the next generation of football fans. We have come to the end of an incredible journey through the shifting landscape of the beautiful game, and the final verdict is completely undeniable. The partnership of Lionel Messi, Luis Suarez, and Neymar Jr. was not just a great football team, it was a definitive historical border. It was the absolute peak and the final stand of an era of football that is never coming back. As we look at the sport in the year 2026, trapped in the iron cage of financial regulations, dominated by independent player corporations, and populated by tactically automated athletes, we realize that MSN was a beautiful miracle that could only exist in its specific moment in time. They were 3 kings who willingly shared a single crown, proving to the world that the absolute highest level of human talent could coexist with total unselfishness and genuine, deep-seated friendship. They gave us 3 years of pure, unadulterated joy, leaving behind a legacy of 364 goals, historic trophies, and memories that will remain permanently burned into the minds of every single football fan who was lucky enough to witness them live. If you have made it this far with us through this deep economic and tactical exploration, I want to say a massive thank you for watching. Do not forget to hit that subscribe button right now and turn on your notifications so you never miss another deep dive from the team here at the Football Archive. Now, I want to hear directly from you. Drop your final thoughts in the comments section below. Do you think modern football has lost its soul to the corporate machine, or do you believe that somewhere, somehow, a club will find a way to break the rules and build a front line that can rival the magic of Messi, Suarez, and Neymar? Let us get a legendary debate going down in the comments, share your opinions, and let us talk football. When we look back at the footage of MSN tearing apart European defenses, dancing through lines, and laughing together after scoring world-class goals, it feels like looking at a lost paradise. It reminds us of why we fell in love with this sport in the first place, back when it was a game built on raw intuition, street creativity, and spontaneous human connection rather than algorithms, data points, and brand optimization metrics. We will never see another trio like MSN because the modern football industry has systematically dismantled the exact ecosystem that allowed them to breathe. It has traded the unpredictable poetry of the streets for the clinical efficiency of the corporate boardroom. But perhaps that is exactly what makes their legacy so incredibly powerful. The fact that it cannot be repeated, cloned, or purchased through sovereign wealth funds means that MSN will forever stand alone in the history books, a shining, unrepeatable monument to what happens when peak football talent matches peak human brotherhood. They were the last of their kind, a flash of pure South American lightning that illuminated the football world before the corporate darkness completely set in. We might build faster teams, richer teams, and more efficient teams in the future, but we will never, ever see 3 footballing geniuses step onto the pitch and play with the pure, unselfish, and joyous harmony of Messi, Suarez, and Neymar. MSN was the definitive peak of the beautiful game, and the archive of their greatness is officially closed forever.